All right, the flavors that we're going to taste today are different from the way we have been doing things. In the first 4 talks, we've been talking about planetary opposites. We've been looking at the principle of complementation, how one planet fulfills another, and the opposition is not an opposition that keeps them apart. It's an opposition that is a complementation, a fulfillment. And we've been looking at complementations in various poles of consciousness. We've had Mars and Venus in the pole of desire, showing how things oppose each other or complement each other in that way. There's something very satisfying in that, because it produces a whole even though you're looking at 2 very opposite things. And by having opposite colors, like, for example, Vincent van Gogh, who had a lot of complementation between Venus and Mars in his horoscope, he painted a lot of complementary colors. He was especially fond of putting yellow next to purple. And even though there is that stark opposition, there's something that's very satisfying, because in some ways you're seeing a whole, a very total kind of whole with that happening. It's a poor man's way of getting a colorful version of white light, because in complementary colors there is a total of white light in them, even though one side stands out very much. In most of the planetary complementary opposites, there is also gender polarization, so that obviously we even still mark our restrooms, males and females, according to the symbols of Mars and Venus. So there is that kind of thing that you understand the masculine and feminine, especially so with Sun and Moon, which are in a way a kind of standout pair of father and mother in our consciousness. Jupiter and Saturn are not so much gendered, but they're made up for by Uranus and Neptune, which we looked at yesterday. Uranus and Neptune have double polarities. There's one kind of polarity on the phenomenal level, where they are manifest in ways that is very different than on the octave level or on the transcendent level. And on that level, they have another polarity which is reversed of the one in the phenomenal. The planets we're going to look at today, Mercury and Pluto, are neutral. They are not planetary opposites. There's almost kind of neuter. And in terms of gender, they are described as males in Greek mythology, but they're not, like really gender defined in their roles in Greek mythology, in their activities. Now, this relates to something else. The 7 planet, there are always 12 gods in the Greek system, 7 of which are males and 5 of which are females. The 7 which are males are like the white keys on a planet. They are called the tonal fundamentals, and they relate to things that are basic, down to earth. They, in our astrology system, relate to Sun, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. The 5 black keys, which include the sharps and flats, which take you into another world, which almost seems a little bit dissonant and dissolving, relate to what are Rosicrucian mythology, mysticism is called the 5 dark globes, where things are dissolved in sort of a sourness and absorbed back into the spiritual worlds. So they're like the 5 females, drawing things into them. We're not talking about male-female here as counterparts or paramours or anything like that. Clearly, the use of female in this kind of a sense is not as a counterpoint. Now, Hades, Pluto, did abduct his wife Persephone, but he did so in rape. And rape isn't really an act of sex. It's an act of demonstration of power. And it's even a humiliation in sex. It isn't like being fulfilled through the opposite. It is being fulfilled by dominating over the other person. So Hades Pluto is never portrayed in mythology as being highly sexual. He's much more grave than that. He is into the power thing. He stayed alone in Tartarus. Even though he had Persephone as a beautiful wife, he stayed by himself. In fact, the only planet that would go into Tartarus to visit him was Mercury, because Mercury could be neutral and didn't seem to wilt under all of his dark power. Similarly, Hermes, or Mercury, did have children, but was certainly not lusty like even Apollo was more lusty. And certainly Ares and Aphrodite, the Mars and Venus of the Greeks, it's certainly not Zeus, who was the Jupiter. They were all highly, highly sexual. Now Hermes does give his name to be half of the name Hermaphrodite, but it was not sexual activity that brought that production about. It was more of being called on to be freed from sex. Are you familiar with the story of Hermaphrodite, who was a beautiful, beautiful young woman and was swimming in a pond and was attacked by a nymph or something like that. And she cried out for help to be freed from this kind of activity, and was neutered in the process, I believe, by Hermes. And then she cried, and then the nymph cried out to Aphrodite to make the condition permanent, and that was how hermaphrodites came into being, at least according to Ovid. And Ovid saw everything in sexual terms. All right, let's see. Where are we here in the notes? Hermes, or Mercury, was the messenger and the servant of the gods and the goddesses, and in that capacity had to be able to appeal to all, had to share something with all. You can't be a servant if you can't relate what you're serving. And if there had been a strong sexual gender differentiation, he could not have communicated. We're talking about the planet that rules communication. The concrete mind, which we talked about last night, is a combination lens and mirror. And it focuses the divine transcendental realms into these worlds where things are completed and finalized and made very definite and made concrete. And that is what Mercury represents. It represents that lens whereby things are projected into concrete existence. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. sunlight, it would be 3 times. For what? Yeah. Does that happen with you, that you have numbers? In sunlight, I've all my life sneezed 3 times, except one period in life I sneezed 5 times in the sun. Scientific American. If you remember that when Scientific American had the thing of tried to get different scientists to, they agreed that there was such a phenomena as a hereditary sun sneezing. All the males in our family are sun sneezers. But but Scientific American had something like a contest for who could explain sun sneezing. They had all kinds of different ideas. None of them were like Max Eindel's idea that the pineal gland, which right up in the center of the brain, where the optic nerve ends up, he claimed that the pineal gland was a heat sensor, and maybe that sunlight would stimulate the pineal gland. I do have nothing to conjoin the ascendant, as did my father. My brother has Mars and the Sun conjoined the ascendant, and Uranus and the all trine to Neptune, so that is a possibility. I don't know what they claim to for that. I've even thought that it was squinting, because sometimes if I want to sneeze, if I put myself in the squinting shape, this has absolutely nothing to do with talk, but it's been a fascination of my life that I've never received a final answer to. But I do know that sometimes if I have to sneeze, even a lamp like this, if you get close enough and look into it in just the right way, it does happen that you sneeze. All right, we're talking about the mind as a lens and as a mirror, a lens through which things are focused into the concrete realms, and in the case of humans who can use that lens self-consciously to take things from the external world, perceptions from things that happen without, and by rethinking them, which is something like remembering them, because in retrospection we don't just remember, we rethink, and in that rethinking we neutralize things, and in that neutralization the soul material that is in experiences can be taken into the spirit. And so it is that kind of a two-way lens that goes both directions. If you're interested in cosmology, it's a multiple focus lens too, because at different times in the evolutionary creation, the different transcendental worlds are focused in reflection into different bodies and different concrete worlds, but different concrete realms. But that's neither here nor there. But it's kind of a fun thing to think about. Is also the lens through which sense perceptions and emotional things are taken into the inner worlds. If the mind is colored, or if it is fogged, or if it is spotted, it's not effective. Fortunately, a telescopic lens can be quite effective, even if it has a few spots here and there. So the mind must not be colored or colorful. And this is why Mercury has to be neutral to be completely effective. Now, the mercurial mind also serves the function of arranging things, because there is the phenomenon that is called assimilation. And assimilation is not the same thing as absorption. Absorption is the way things are drawn in, but assimilation means that it is brought back to its similar in idea. That is, that there are universal ideas, and everything that is created in the phenomenal world is compounded from universal ideas. So when things are taken back into the spirit, they are assimilated back into their parent principles. just the way that food is assimilated to the parts of the body that most need it. Like the brain needs sugars and only sugars. So sugars are assimilated to the brain, and that's all that it uses, whereas the heart likes fats and the oils and things like that. So Mercury is the arranger. It arranges things in such a way that they are meaningful. So it's meant to create thoughts and organize them and present them to the spirit for the spirit to form conclusions. It produces living thoughts out of creative ideas, and it arranges and focuses them. Now, all of these functions are best carried out in neutrality. If the mind is colored, it doesn't work well. And if the mind is asked to do things that should be carried out by the other planets, it doesn't work very well in that. A perfect example is that it is the sun or self that should make decisions. And it makes those decisions on the basis of intuitions, usually the Uranus and Neptunian intuitions. If nothing else, it'll function off of Pluto and it will make arbitrary decisions. But we hear in our society that we should make rational decisions. And people think then that one should make decisions on the basis of the mind. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. The mind is excellent for gathering information, for making decisions, and it's excellent for organizing that information in a rational way so that you can see what can be learned from that information. But if it's asked to make the decision, it becomes like a senator or a representative. Because the senators and representatives, when they're asked to make decisions, especially if those decisions are on sensitive, touchy issues, what they do is they order a new study. And that's what Mercury does. If asked to make a decision, it'll present information, and it's a phenomenologist. The information is supposed to have the decision inherent in it, rather than... And so Mercury will always look for new information because it doesn't want to make decisions. It's not what it's supposed to do. Now, the neutrality of Pluto is a different kind of neutrality, which can be understood mystically, but it's not such a easy kind of neutrality to understand. As we've been looking at it, and we went through a big thing with this a few years ago when we looked at the astrology of the way that the pineal gland is ruled by Neptune and half of the spinal fire is ruled by Neptune, and that they were both responsible for one half of the clairvoyance. And there is the Neptunian clairvoyance, and there's the Neptunian part in clairvoyance and the Uranian part in clairvoyance, and they both are different. One is the clairvoyance of an occultist, and one is that of a mystic. And in this, Neptune rules the human spirit, which is the realm of ideational thought, and it's the higher octave of Mercury, and so what happens there is that it rules the spirit in masculine sense. We're talking about Neptune, but we're getting to Pluto. It's a long, slow journey to get there. I'm sort of a little bit sleep deprived today, so I'm not being especially cogent, and I'm not using segues extremely well. The sun represents self. Jupiter represents abstract mind, both of which are found in the region of abstract thought. But the human spirit is also the third attribute of the Godhead is also focused in the region of abstract thought, and it is ruled or represented by Neptune. From the standpoint of Neptune, the human spirit looks at abstract thought as chaos. All of those ideas put together, not just the ideation process, but all of those ideas put together. It's a divine cosmic chaos wherein all of the laws and principles are understood in a chaotic disorder. Neptune is like that. It sees connections between things that most people don't see because it's seeing it in a chaotic organization and not in a cosmic organization. So the human spirit, as Neptune, loves to wield these concepts in a way that a musician would wield them. Thus, from the universal idea of buoyancy and the idea of arc shape and the idea of bringing them together as a mathematician creates a boat. And if there's enough desire or if there's enough will to be, that idea gets carried out and an archetype is made and a boat is fulfilled from that. The way we are looking at it, or have been looking at it, Uranus is representative of the life spirit, which transcends human spirit. And the relationship of human spirit, life spirit to human spirit, is like the relationship of light to color. And it's like the relationship of truth to truths, or the relationship of truth to principles. Uranus represents pure truth, and it represents no principles because it is the truth out of which all the principles are derived. This is why Uranian intuitions are born whole. There is no thought, there is no connectivity as there is with Neptunian. The relationship of life spirit to human spirit is like the relationship of selfness to self. It's the selfness out of which all cells are found, and consequently, Uranus has to do with altruism. So, life spirit is like seamless, unbounded love. In fact, it used to be called the crystallium. It was called the realm of pure light crystal, which relates both to the idea of truth and to the idea of light being present at the same time. In this way of looking at things, Pluto represents divine spirit, which transcends life spirit. See, with me you have to have a little bit of patience. We eventually get to that, to where we're trying to go to. So, in this way of looking at things, Pluto represents divine spirit. We're getting back finally to Pluto. With me, sometimes talks are something like the Holy Grail. You get a glimpse of it once in a while, of the subject once in a while, and that's about it. Pluto represents divine spirit, which transcends life spirit, which transcends human spirit. The relationship of divine spirit to life spirit is that divine spirit represents the power that is behind the light. So if you look at the trinity of divine spirit, life spirit, and human spirit, it's like the power that is in a storage battery, that is ever hidden, that is ever invisible, is what is represented by Pluto. When that power becomes manifest as light, like driving a light bulb, the light is the life spirit, and the life spirit is the representation of the divine spirit. As Christ says, to know me is to know the Father. That is, if you see the light, you can get a feel for the power that is behind it. If that light is put through a triangular prism, that is, if the trine principle that produces a self, it breaks into colors. And so the human spirit is the principle of color. Consequently, if we look at Neptune as manifest in people's character, people who are highly Neptunian like spectra. They like full rainbow spectra. Whereas Uranian people like the vividness, even if the color doesn't matter, as long as the vividness is there. In fact, even a very bright white that reflects all of the light is something that the Uranian people like. So, we find in Greek mythology that Hades had the helmet of invisibility, and if he had to be around people, he put on that helmet of invisibility and nobody could see him, and then he wouldn't be bothered by them. So this power of will, which when manifest seems almost arbitrary, is what we're talking about. We're talking about something that our language is not capable of. To point toward Pluto from our consciousness here in this world where there are so many limitations, Pluto seems cold and it even seems brutal. Some of the lower manifestations of Pluto are like that if people identify with the principle incorrectly. But if we understand that Pluto represents divine spirit and it represents all, or it represents everything at the same time, it never enters directly into its creation. All creation comes about as things that have been emanated off of Pluto without Pluto entering into them. If that is the case, then the power of Pluto is maintained by abstaining from all things. We're going to look at the horoscope of The Godfather in a few days. And if you saw the movie The Godfather never says anything. The Godfather, it's understood what the Godfather wants, and it's carried out. That's how they caught Joe Bonanos a few years ago. He was retired, and he was still running the mobs, but he was running them from Tucson, Arizona. And it's such a thing that Godfathers would always randomly pick a coin phone, a phone booth, because if they had to talk on the phone, they couldn't be traced to that phone, and they couldn't use the same phone all the time. The idea was that there was never anything written. But Joe Bonanos started getting old, and he started writing notes to himself. And what they did is they made a special garbage truck for Joe Bonanos, and his notes ended up in the garbage can, and they went into the garbage truck, and they took all of the garbage and separated it, and then they got leads, and that's how they eventually caught him and put him into prison for the rest of his life. So, but it's it's nothing that can ever be seen. It's a power that maintains its power by never being invested directly in anything, because if it were directly invested in anything, its power would be dissipated. It's completely indifferent to its creations. If you want to understand this, read the last book of the Enneads by Plotinus. He describes experience in a very rational way, as only the Neoplatonists can do it. In his description of what he calls the good, in the Platonistic system, the divine spirit was called the good, and his descriptions fit Pluto perfectly. All right, we better get going here. We never will get anywhere. Of course, now when we start looking at human horoscopes, we're not going to find anybody that's working direct from the divine spirit. But we can get some few ideas. Let's split them in half, I guess. I finally got around to conserving paper by putting 2 on a sheet. It's a little bit awkward to work with, but it works really nicely. First horoscope is the horoscope of Art Bell, who is a very mercurial individual. There are 5 planets, including Mercury, in the mercurial signs, Gemini and Virgo. And the primary angles Gemini are held by Mercury and held by Gemini and Virgo. The primary angles are called the ascendant and the 10th house. They're called primary because they are the strongest points, geometric points in the construction of the houses. The secondary angles, or sometimes called the supplementary angles, are the 7th and the 12th house, and they're more responsive or reactive at best, and they're not primary in initiating things. Obviously, with all these mercurial qualities, Art Bell is interested in just about anything, just about everything. He's especially interested in technical things. He served in the military. He was a Navy radio man. And he's been known for quite a few years now as a talk show interviewer. He is the founder of Dreamland. He is the founder of a show that is now called Coast to Coast Live. Just recently he retired within the last 2 weeks. Now, Mercury is the communicator between heaven and earth, but it is also the ruler of human communication as well. Now, in talk shows, the host has a very unusual place. He's a middleman. On one hand, he is the alter ego of the person that he is interviewing. And he draws out or he controls the person who's being interviewed. And the best interviewers are those that are completely neutral, so that the person can feel almost like they're talking to themselves. On the other hand, the interviewer is also the alter ego of the audience. He represents the whole radio audience, and he has to appeal to them, and he has to draw them out, because most people, when they call up a show, are not organized in their thoughts. And if you listen but a very few minutes to a talk show, the interviewer has to help people collect their thoughts and put them together very carefully. So, and then on top of that, the whole audience speaks to the person who's being interviewed, the guest or the celebrity or whatever it is, through the interviewer. So it's a very Gemini world. It's a middleman world. The guest does not just speak extemporaneously. And in a show that's about all kinds of new agey things, that's kind of good, because otherwise it would just become propaganda. The audience doesn't want just a general expostulation. And so the host has to focus that. So the host has to be sensitive, and it has to look at 2 sides of things. And if a host has too much personality, it colors things, and it really makes things terrible. Currently, Art Bell has been replaced by a man who believes it is his duty to inject himself in it. It makes the whole, he's trying to make himself some kind of celebrity or something like that. He's too opinionated and all of that. It just biases the whole show. Now, Art Bell was an excellent host. in that he didn't judge. He kept things clearly neutral. Even when he had personal views, he kept things very neutral. And he asks questions or makes interjections only to keep the narrative going and to keep it from going astray. So he doesn't judge. So we can see with this, he has this clear, airy sign, Gemini neutrality about him. He's out there for the whole world to see, except that he can't be seen, so he's out there for the whole world to be heard. Gemini rules the lungs, and in the lungs, an exchange is made between oxygen coming in, and in the oxygenation, there is one kind of consciousness, and from the carbon dioxide going out. But there are always double exchanges. And the double exchange is that the way that oxygen is brought in is in a chemical bonding. But the way the carbon dioxide that goes out, it is not in a chemical bonding. It's in a pressure bonding. You can explain it better, can't you? The pressure system of the way carbon dioxide is carried out of the body is not done by hemoglobin. Can you explain how that's done? Okay. Sorry for that. I got myself into something that I wasn't ready to carry out. So it's an exchange. So Gemini is excellent at exchanging. In fact, the two brothers, Castor and Polydeuces, exchanged their immortality. One of them was mortal and one of them was immortal, and they take turns with the being alive. So the sun is his identity, and the concrete mind is Mercury, and so they're both focused on exchange. And this is somebody that really enjoys the exchange of ideas. He doesn't like argumentation. He loves the exchange of ideas because he rarely ever got into an argument. But he did like exchanging different points of view. Jupiter conjoins the ascendant, and it's squared to Uranus. So this shows another side that is perfect for a radio show like that. But Mercury can organize things in such a way that they have many different interpretations. The Jupiter square Uranus indicates that many of those interpretations are speculative, and speculation is exciting. It's sort of like driving a very fast motorcycle down a mountain. I once had a sporty little car. I drove it down the west slope of the Sierras because I was late for an appointment. And that was fun, going around those curves like that. And speculation is like that. Perhaps he's excessively speculative. Virgo is an earth sign, so there is some grounding. But with this chart, this is important because there's too much of a tendency to be in a mental world and in a speculative world and to not be grounded. In fact, some of that comes up when you look at the disposition of Mercury. At the moon, I'm sorry. Well, you can say Mercury too because the moon is square to Mercury. And the moon square Mercury is somebody who can't make up their mind. And that's perfect for a host because the host is not really making up the mind. And so there's a lot of ambivalence and there's a lot of indecision and going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Even the Neptune in the first house it's a high degree of sensitivity, and it's conjoined to the moon, so there's a high degree of impressionability. But with the Libra, there is that tendency to librate, to keep on going back and forth and back and forth and just never come to a decision. So it's sort of a downside in that he can't really always conclude things. Another downside is that with Virgo rising, you're subject to slander and gossip. And if there isn't anything happening, you're likely to make your own. And this is a life that has been filled with slander. He's had all kinds of lawsuits that people who were jealous of him started all kinds of stories that were not true. and he had to sue, protect his own name, because his livelihood was at stake. So this is neutral. It's communicative. It's very much like common signs, but he can't make up his mind. He just retired for the 4th time 2 weeks ago, and you never know whether there might not be another comeback. All right, let's look at the next horoscope. Everybody know who Steffi Graf is? We'll talk a little bit about her. Steffi Graf, I think it was almost 30 years ago to the day. On this day, every day I read several poetry sites and several photography sites and several science sites and one pop culture site. And in the pop culture site, it said 30 years ago on this day, Steffi Graf became the #1 ranked tennis player in the world. And she was the #1 tennis person in the world for 377 weeks, which is unprecedented. This means she was always the top seed, which meant she got pushovers at the beginning of the tournament and had the easiest road to being at the top. But to remain in that high position week after week after week is unprecedented, because there's always some new young phenom coming up. Now, a few years ago, there was an excellent movie which I really enjoyed. It had James Earl Jones in it, and that was a movie called Field of Dreams. Did any of you see that movie? It was a very good movie. And the whole idea of Field of Dreams is this man got this communication that he should build a baseball field in the middle of the cornfields in Iowa. And if he did that, there would be shadowy people who would come back to this world who were dead. All the baseball greats would come back, and they would play baseball. And it was sort of a nostalgia film, and it had a certain amount of power in that. But the high point of the whole film was when the hero who put together this crazy field, you know it still exists in Iowa. You can go to see it, the baseball field, and it's treated as well as any big. Have you gone to see it, Jerry? Oh, it's still. People go to see their imaginary baseball. And they had all the great heroes there. But the big high-pointed play was playing catch. The hero, who was played by Kevin Costner, who was only successful in films when he is a baseball player. He's been in a lot of mercurial roles, though. He was the postman, and he was in a lot of other roles. I should look at his chart in that regard and see why he was fit in those roles all the time. But his father comes back, his father with whom he never really connected. And in the film, they don't say a word. They just throw the ball back and forth. And that's what communication is. There is a connection. You can see it. There's a little child that since he's been 3 years old in a little town, I don't even know the name of it, in Chile. And every year when I visit in Chile, I'm invited to this house, and there's this shy little child who comes from a very sentimental mother. His mother is so sentimental that 3 years after the father died, she couldn't come out of her grief. In fact, I had to do grief counseling, and as a result, she did start coming out of it. But this shy child, it's very hard to communicate with him. But every year when I come there, he brings out the bean bag, and we throw the bean bag back and forth, and it's a communication, and he knows he's loved, and there's a human connection, because that's a real big thing in this. Because in this world, we're isolated and we're separated from each other. And when we do talk, words are so loaded and we're so inept that it's hard for us to communicate. I can communicate ideas in words, but to communicate thoughts and feelings, that's why I'm not married, is because I'm an idiot as far as communicating feelings with each other. So what we're talking about, the fascination, each sport has its own fascination. And most sports are goal-oriented. You know, in baseball, you try to get it out of the field altogether. And in football, you try to push it past the other guy, but there's always some goal. In tennis, the goal is communicated. And you lose a point every time you don't continue the communication. You have to keep the volley going. As long as you're going back and forth and back and forth. And so it's the ideal sport for being able to communicate back and forth. So Steffi Graf is, look at this, there are 6 planets and the ascendant are in mercurial signs. So this is somebody who's quick and agile and, Gemini pattern. And Gemini and Mercury is there. So there's almost, it's like in the 12th house, it's the destiny, it's the duty to respond. And so that's what the whole life is like. She wins because she can force others to not respond. And she can do this with this mercurial aplomb. She had plenty of power. The sun is trine to Pluto, so it's in a very strong trine. So she's got the power that she can follow through. Because in paddle sports or when you use a racket or something like that, the key is follow through. In ping pong, you know that what happens after you've hit the ball is as important as what happened before you hit the ball. So the Virginian signs also show something that is important. It's a sign of child prodigies. You're never going to be a tennis star after you're 28. Because after 28, the nervous system is already going into degeneration. The muscles are already going into degeneration after 28. The numbers are such that after age 28, you lose 0.5% of your muscular strength, except for special people that do all kinds of working out and maintain the muscles. Most people, though, lose 0.5% of their muscular strength every year. So that by the time that you're 68, which would be 40 years later, you've lost 20% of your strength. If you look, I'm at that age. My body is 8 years old. There's a certain kind of flaccidity that you see. I used to see it only in older people. Only now I see it in the mirror. And I try to maintain muscular strength, or I try to keep, especially in the heart, and I do that by walking. But I find, like this week, I haven't been walking. I try to walk 5 miles at a time, and now when I go back to walking tomorrow night, I'm going to have cramps. I'm going to have to fight with the cramps. I'll take all kinds of herbs, though. Maybe I'll be able to. Yeah, but this is the only person that has ever won the Grand Slam in one calendar year. We're talking about perfection. Perfection is what is necessary, and that's why the little kids that are perfectionists, that do things over again and again and again, they are the ones that succeed. The perfection in this chart is shown in all of the Virginian planets, and the fact that Saturn is conjoined to Venus. And Saturn conjoined Venus is somebody that perfects in... Oops. You were asking? Ela? Hmm? You were asking, you had a question?
No, I don't think so.
Oh. Okay, I didn't want to spend that much time on Steffi Graf, but for some reason I'm in a chatty kind of mood today. perfectionism. There's sort of it can mean emotional insecurity, and it did with her. She married a man that was a few years older than her, but in the insecurity, you try to make things better, and you try to make things better, and you try to make things better. We're going to have to move along swiftly because we're already supposed to be about 5 horoscopes ahead. William Butler Yeats. This has only 3 planets in Gemini, and it has none in Virgo, and Virgo is intersected, but it does show a different side of mercurial neutrality. It has 4 planets and a grand trine in air signs. Air is a very neutral element. It doesn't have, it's a positive element, but it doesn't have all the push that fire has, and it certainly doesn't have all the sluggish receptivity that water and air have. So we're talking about communication through a 4-planet, through a grand trine in air signs. Now, in order to have neutral consciousness, one must exercise neutral consciousness. And that means thinking. Because if you think, and you do a lot of thinking about a lot of subjects, you're going to recognize that there are inconsistencies. And that you learn that the more that you think, the more you appreciate clear, exact thoughts, but you can't be too much in love with those thoughts, because if you do, it biases your thought, and you will, if you're in an intellectual field, you know very quickly that you can't be biased. William Butler Yeats was an extremely thoughtful man, and he thought about almost everything. Politics, he's a great poet. He was very much involved with mysticism, and very much involved with study of fairies and the lore of all of that, because he was in Ireland, and some of his relatives had that kind of clairvoyance. So the wide Sun conjoined Uranus shows very wide-awake thought. And that wide-awake thought was the result of deliberate thinking. Mercury rises well before the Sun, and so this is somebody that was always looking ahead, thinking. Even when he wrote letters, they're purely clear and very thoughtful letters. There are some of the letters between him and another poet named Ezra Pound. You can occasionally find publication of them. They're in the public. They're available to the public, and they're just really, really sharp. The mind gets sharper by use, and this is what we get with intellectual types of people. In our times, our self-consciousness is derived by thinking. Mercury is not especially strong in here, but the intellectual tendencies with the air signs are. So this is what he was. He was an intellectual man. I want to just look at one thing for a few seconds and then move on, because we have to move so fast that it's going to be unpleasant for a few minutes. There is such a thing as conservation of the character, meaning to say that you can't go too far one way without having some compensation in another direction. In this horoscope, the compensation is shown in the Venus conjoined Pluto square to Mars. This man was an obsessive. He had several love obsessions in his life. Fortunately, they weren't sex obsessions, but he had love obsessions. He proposed marriage at 3 different times in life to the same woman, and she refused him because she was afraid of his obsessive love for her. So he turned around and married her daughter. It's that kind of a thing. And so obsessiveness built up in the character because there is too much adaptability, doing this and this and this and this and this. It's always amazing to me how things come rising up in the character. When you get too far in one direction, something comes from the opposite direction to compensate. All right. That's a sextile, and it's what? Oh, the Moon and Mars. That's not strong enough to be in opposition. I was looking at the Mercury sextile Mars. All right. Nadia Boulanger. I expect that everybody knows who Nadia Boulanger is. Jerry, do you know who she is? Huh? Who did? Oh, he did? He was that lucky? No. Pir Vilayat Khan. This is a horoscope that has several mercurial classics in it. This is the horoscope of someone who was a child prodigy. At age 10, she entered the Paris Conservatory of Music. And during her stay in the Paris Conservatory of Music, she won every prize that could be won. And she had 3 majors while she was in the Paris Conservatory. She's the first woman to conduct the Boston Symphony, and she's the first woman to conduct the New York Philharmonic. Now, Saturn is in the first house, which indicates somebody that doesn't have a lot of personal appeal. And all of the planets, the fundamental planets, are beneath the Earth. And she has nothing at all in the 9th or 10th houses. So this is not somebody who's going to be famous. She's not world famous at all. Now, we said that Mercury is the servant of the gods, and Virgo is the sign that represents service. So with the Sun and Mercury in Virgo, and putting together with everything we just said, this is an unseen servant. Her service was to educate and communicate perfect knowledge of musical composition, because she could penetrate to the heart of musical composition. In the United States alone, she taught over 600 composers, and she had many more in Europe. Aaron Copland was her student. Bela Bartok was her student. And even Leonard Bernstein came to her for advice. So this is someone whose service was to communicate, and to communicate with mental perfection. They even have some taped interviews of her working with different composers and helping them understand how to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish in their compositions. Obviously, with Pluto and Neptune conjoined in the other mercurial sign, we can understand that she had a sustained sensitivity that allowed the perfection to be accomplished. They sextile the Saturn. So this is somebody, Saturn-Neptune or Pluto-Neptune aspects are aspects where you can take something that is very indefinite in spirit and you can hold it long enough to make it manifest. And having both of them in aspect to Neptune, that is just what she did. Saturn and Pluto. Pluto is conjoined and Saturn is sextile. Okay. Now let's look at a few other things. I know you. Okay, what do you want?
Just quickly, what specifically
makes this one a prodigy? Because normally Mercury's in the first house.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that. It might just be the Saturn alone. I don't know. I couldn't find the reason for that astrologically. Now, the two sides of the concrete mind, represented by Gemini in this sense, work into the third house as give-and-take relationships. They're different than the give-and-take relationships of the seventh house, where you see yourself more as an alter ego, but where everybody is equal and the conditions of equality are not necessarily of the same ages, are what relations with siblings are all about. So this has the focus in the third house, and relations to siblings were extremely important to this person. Remember, we said that she has perfectionism carried to a neurotic extreme. Now, this woman herself was a brilliant composer of music, but she composed almost nothing. The reason why is because she had a sister, and the sister was a little older, and she thought that the sister was a much better composer of music than she was. The sister died as a child, and Nadia Boulanger felt she could never live up to what her sister would have done, and so she never composed music. But everybody knew that she knew so much, and her knowledge was so pointed that she was, in fact, living through her sister as somebody who communicated to other people rather than as somebody who was an expressor. Like if you take the planets that are in the third house, and even those down near the nadir, the Venus, for example, if you put them in the fifth house, she couldn't have helped but to have composed, because then she would have had to have expressed. All right, now we're coming to the Pluto planets, Pluto charts now. Now, when we think of absolute power, we think of dictators. And this man was an open and avowed dictator, even a lover of the Nazis. Pluto is in a trine with the Sun and with Mars. So he had the will to power, and he had the drive to assert it. Now, there is a triad between Pluto, Sun, and Mars. Pluto represents power in potential. It rules Scorpio, which is fixed water. And power in potential is like that fixed water that stands behind the dam that doesn't seem to do anything, but it gives all of the power to the water that does go through the race that drives the turbines. The Sun is manifest power. You don't have to be standing out in the sun very long to realize how great its power is. And Mars represents kinetic energy. So this is someone that has the ability to take power and take it from potential and manifest it and turn it into use. He was a military man, but strangely enough, he was also a union man. They had in Argentina that was possible. And he had all kinds of friends and allies that would stand behind him no matter what. So this is really quite a horoscope in that way. Beside the Pluto aspects, we have the 3 planets in Scorpio which are ruled by Pluto, and that indicates a willingness to use raw power. Now, Mercury conjoins Jupiter. No, Mercury conjoins Saturn, and they're square to Jupiter, which indicates bad judgment. And he showed this by executing priests and alienating the church as soon as he became a dictator. he became sort of anti-religious. Now, but because he's got the sun in Libra, he goes back and forth, and he undoes what he did earlier, and that's the kind of person that he was. He was a very indecisive man. The planet has all those planets in Gemini, which chatters back and forth, and so the Libra always wants to care for the other, and he got into problems with appeasing people. And in appeasing people, he was a dictator that wasn't always a dictator. And he tried to dictate too many things, and as a result, he compromised himself. He was less famous in his own country than his second wife. We have Neptune in the 7th house, and Neptune is trine the Sun and Mars. And especially the Neptune trine Mars indicates charisma. To this day, he's not in the primary cemetery. The Recoleta in Buenos Aires, you go there, you'll never find him. But her tomb is the most visited tomb, maybe one of the most visited tombs in the entire world. We've all heard stories about how charismatic she was. For him, it was fantasy. He had all kinds of sexual problems, and fantasy was among them. And the fantasy is indicated by the Venus square to Neptune, indicating she was an image to him, but her charisma helped him. Juan Perón still has a lot of influence in Argentina. The Peronist party is the strongest party in Argentina, because they did do something really right. They made a lot of good friends, which means they produced a civil service, which is like 11th house and 7th house kind of thing. And in that civil service, enough people were given stipends so that they could always control the vote. So that no progress ever gets done, but the Peronists always get elected because the stipends are given to the people as, everybody gets their little hit of money. All right, we're way overdue. We should almost skip the last three. Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, when you think of art, you don't usually think of power. But Georgia O'Keeffe was a powerful woman, and her horoscope shows it in several ways. Yes. There's that group of 4 planets in Scorpio, which is itself a Plutonian kind of thing. The sun is in the center of it, so she used willpower to get whatever she wanted. Several times she related to the power inside of herself to overcome and learn all kinds of very difficult things. There are how many? 4, 5, 6 planets, and the primary angles are, in fact, all the angles are in fixed signs, and that's the power that will resist almost anything. Now, we said that we can't mentally understand divine spirit, but we can feel it. And in a way, we can sense it. And we sense that with the power of light. If you look at some of her New Mexico art has the power and heat of light in it. And that's the way she doesn't do anything else. She painted and did everything else she did by feel. She knew the power of feeling. And she knew that if you dilute something, you take away its power. So if you look at her, almost any of her paintings, they have little detail. There's a deliberate effort to not include detail. And so by that simplicity, she could express raw power and raw intensity. Pluto conjoins Neptune in Gemini, and it's sextile to Saturn. So we again have somebody that can hold a spiritual ideal long enough to make it manifest. And they're trying to Venus, which is in the 8th house, so that she has that power and she can hold it, and it's an artistic power because Venus is in the mix. It is through her marriage that she was made a power in the world. Saturn is in the 6th house, and she married a man who was at least 20 years old, 23 years old. I got it in the notes here. He was 23 years older than her, and he was very powerful. His name is Alfred Stieglitz, who was one of the great early art photographers. And he kept her as a mistress, and he left his wife to be with her. And for his own art, he did all sorts of, not pornographic, but what was erotic photography of her. And he promoted her. He had a special gallery for her, and that's how she became famous. But I think it's just because of the raw personal power that she has that carries through her artwork that made her so strong. Let's quickly look at the next one. When we say that Pluto is neutral, we say that it is almost with amorality that it's willing to exert raw power. This is somebody who would murder either directly or indirectly in order to get what he wanted without any qualm. This is probably one of the most brutal horoscopes you'll ever see in your life. 4 planets in Scorpio, the ascendant in Scorpio. Pluto is trying to the moon, cold emotions. He can just carry it all out the way he wants to do it. This is Vito Genovese, who was head of the Genovese crime family. Of course, before him, it wasn't called the Genovese crime family. I forget what it was, but for several generations, it was named after a different family until he just brutally took over. Said, I have a friend that lives in the town where he used to live in, and he says, there's every building in town is Genovese Pharmacy or something like that. He really did put his personality. He was a self-made man. Again, we have the Sun as the first planet in the first house, conjoined Mars, conjoined Uranus. That's a really violent combination. There's no scruple about expressing violence at all. Murder, treachery, traitordom. He did all of those. He even preferred to work that way. He didn't like to work just by influence alone, and that's what the first house does to it. And the Mars-Uranus are like that. That's a bomb thrower with something in mind. He never sought wealth. He had plenty of it, but he wanted power, and he only wanted power. He was fascinated with power. In fact, when he was in prison, he controlled the mob from behind bars. And he had so many friends, again, that Pluto trying the moon, that the friends were willing to take care of things for him. He controlled the mob when he was under exile to Sicily. It was just as if he was in his same neighborhood in New York City. I don't know what to say much more about it. I don't want to do anything to glorify somebody that is a power monger and uses it that way. Now, most of what we're going to look at in this horoscope we've already looked at before, so we'll look at this as a review horoscope.
Are you on Princess Grace now?
We're on Princess Grace. The Sun is in the first house in Scorpio, and the Ascendant is in Scorpio. And this is somebody that was, again, a self-made person, and someone who tried to advance herself through her own ambitions to power. She was well studied as a child, but I don't think you could quite qualify her as a prodigy. She was in all kinds of child productions. Both the Sun and Mars are in Scorpio, but she did not use violence. She promoted herself through sex. The image that we have of Grace Kelly is not the image that is there. Is not in touch with reality. In fact, the MGM studios spent a fortune trying to cover up her sex affairs because she had sex affairs with everyone. She knew the power of sex. And she knew that it's easier when you're reborn in a female's body, it's easier to draw sexual power off of other people. There are people that can do it in either body, but women usually are capable of drawing power off of men. So that was what she was like. She wanted power, and she wanted to feel the power of sex in herself. Alfred Hitchcock, who had a taste for blondes, was taken aback by her. He said he described her as a volcano covered with snow. And in Hollywood, her nickname was the Ice Queen. People were in terror of having to work with her. Power is power because it doesn't spend itself. So she really realized after a while she had to do something to not spend herself, and she became a control freak. She tried to control the set when she was on the set. She became very strong on self-control, and that was the result of her success. It resulted in, the manifestation of the Sun trying the Moon, trying Pluto, a grand trine and a very strong grand trine, showing that she had the power of self-control. But even with that, she made a mistake. She married. Venus rules the marriage partner, Taurus on the cusp, and when she got in the position of marriage, she was in the 12th house, which is self-undoing. And she got a taste of her own medicine, and because Prince Rainier basically isolated her, she was just an appurtenance, and she was unable to control him. I have his chart somewhere. It would be nice to bring it out and look at it sometime, but we're way overstayed with it. We have 3 minutes to rest before Rod begins, so let's close with the Rosicrucian Student's Prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Was she the one who died out for murder?
I believe so. Yes.